Renegade, Chapter 8, page number 61. When you go through the door, Hassan, there must be no hesitation. If you hesitate, you may well die. Do you understand? Hassan nodded, but Jacob could see the fear in the boy's eyes. Hassan believed in God, and he believed in Jacob, but he did not yet believe in himself. That was the gift Jacob intended to give him today. The boy was 14, older than Jacob, and had been when his father had first placed a rifle in his hands and taught him to kill the Russian soldiers who had invaded Afghanistan. Jacob had only been 11, but he had been blessed with a love of his God, a desire to see his enemies killed, and steady hands. Leaning down so his face was level with the boy's, Jacob held Hassan's gaze with his own. You will not hesitate, for I have chosen you to be one of my favorite warriors. You are one of the few that I permit to follow me wherever I go. Do you understand this? I understand, Hassan's voice cracked. I will not fail you. You will not fail me because you will not fail God. Do you understand? The boy nodded. You serve God, as I do, and we have been given the task of ridding our country of the Westerners who would kill us and destroy our faith. This is not to be allowed. I will not allow it. Page 62. Good. And know that if the time should come that you must give your life in pursuit of serving God, you will ascend immediately to heaven and know the delights that will never be yours here in this world. I know of these things, Mullah. Jacob smiled and once more stood straight. Of course you do. I have taught them to you. He turned from the boy and stared at the building across the street where the CIA team was holed up. It was early morning. The sun was only now lighting the sky in the east. Pedestrians filled Par-Shinar streets, all of them wanting to finish their morning chores and shopping so that they could get back inside and escape the chill that had fallen from the mountains. Running the Americans to ground had taken only a few hours. Zulfikar's grandsons proved very adroit, which means skillful, at scouting through the streets. The question remained, however, whether they had accomplished their goal without alerting their quarry. The three Americans and their two Pashtun guides stayed to the shadows of the city, but they were foreigners, and foreigners got noticed in Par-Shinar. No matter how desperately they tried to fit in, Jacob still did not know what the CIA team's objective was, but that did not truly matter. His objective superseded their goal. Now that he had the missile launchers, Jacob needed the bait to set his trap. The American spies would serve as a distraction. Standing inside a small store on the corner of the street across from the CIA agents, Jacob saw Borisov step out onto the street. Once Jacob had explained the Russians' part in this subterfuge, which means secret or plan, Borisov hadn't been enthusiastic, but he had agreed. Jacob turned to Hassan. Remember, warrior, that you are doing God's work, that you are smiting his enemies. I will. Hassan seemed more calm now, that the moment was upon them. Jacob remembered that feeling too, when the first Russian soldier had settled into the sights of the old single-shot rifle he had carried into battle. He could still remember the man's face, the young features before the bullet had struck him, and the bloody ruin that it had become. Over the years, his appetite for blood of his enemies had only grown stronger. Do not meet their gaze, Hassan. Look at their hands, their bodies, the way they stand. Eyes can lie to you and make you the fool, but a man's body will reveal his truth to you. I know, the boy gave a small nod. You have taught me. Today will be the proof of your ability to be a warrior in God's name. I know this also. Then do not fail, and do not kill the Americans unless I have to. I want them alive. It shall be as you say. Good, then let's go. Hassan, looking small and frail, followed Jacob. Jacob had chosen the boy for his task because he looked so vulnerable, not even the slightest hint of beard growth. And yet he was a crack shot, one of Ali's finest pupils. Jacob had instructed the boy's faith But Wally had coached him in handling guns and knives, intending him to be a bodyguard for their leader in public places. Hassan would be able to pass as his son, not another man. Borisov stood his ground at the corner. 5 of them, just as you said, 3 American agents and 2 Pashtuns. Good. What have you told? You told them that I am supplying you with munitions. Borisov started walking back into the building. They are not surprised. I have a history of doing such business. Sometimes I've sold to the CIA when agents needed weapons that would allow them to blend into the surroundings and countryside. Page 64. Do you know any of these men in the room? No. That was good. That meant they would not be able to read Borisov in any way. It occurs to me that I will need to have a reason for surviving this encounter. Borisov crossed the big room and headed up the narrow steps against one wall. If asked later, you can say that you were ransomed back to your companions. Just make sure that you really sell this. I do not want to appear on the CIA's terminate on sight list. All will be well. All will be well. Draw your weapon as we discussed. I will take care of the rest. Wally is across the street? Yes, with a sniper rifle. No harm will come to you. Yakov followed the Russian up the steps with Hassan at his heels, stomach nodding as he watched the action playing out from the control center in Creech Air Force Base. Captain David Carter presented a calm exterior to his cyber team. Everyone in the room knew what the stakes were. Zalmay Yaqub was near the top of the most wanted of al-Qaeda terrorists. If they could bring Yaqub down, alive or dead, it would be a feather in Carter's cap, a certain commendation in his file. In his late 30s, with neatly cropped brown hair and freckles, Carter was one of the oldest people in the room. Most of the cyber specialists piloting the unmanned aerial vehicles were just out of high school or in their early 20s. When the UAV pilots weren't in the control center, pulling reconnaissance, waiting for that instant when they got to fire a kill shot, with either a rifle equipped or bomb equipped, they were usually piled in someone's house, racking up kills in Halo, Counter-Strike, or other online video games. The gaming was good training for the jobs that they held at the control center, and the United States Air Force had chosen these individuals for those very skills. Prentice, do we have an ID on the individual with Yaqub? Negative. Prentice was 20, a blonde who probably broke hearts all over the base. When she wasn't breaking hearts, she was shattering egos. She was rumored to be pure death on every console game known to man. With rapt attention, she studied the flat screen panels in front of her. She held a joystick in her steady hand, controlling the General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper flying high recon over Par-Shinar, Pakistan. The drone was relaying a satellite link from the CIA team embedded in the country. Not so long ago, the Pakistanis had booted the CIA drone base out of Shamsi airfield. The spy agency hadn't been set back. They were organizing new drone bases inside of Afghanistan and farming some of their work out to the Air Force. Most of those assignments were scut work, but the apprehension of Yaqub was a career builder. I got a partial face as they entered Ground Zero. One of the CIA team sent me the image. Ground Zero was the building where CIA team lay in wait for Yaqub. The main screen in front of Prentice was a top-down view from the Reaper. The UAV circled overhead at 12,000 feet, less than half of its possible operational altitude. The onboard cameras were nothing short of spectacular. The cost of the MQ-9 was $36 million plus per unit. With the present magnification, it was possible to easily scan the rooftops. On the screen of Prentice's right, a face was slowly taking shape. As she had said, the image was only partial, shot from the side. But, page 66, the computer program was extrapolating the data and slowly guessing what the other profile looked like based upon the image. When it was finished, it would build a frontal view of the face, and then that would run through the facial recognition databases. He looks like a boy, maybe 10 years old, Prentice spoke quickly, absorbed by the control of the UAV. You sure about the age? Pretty sure. I have a younger brother who's about the same age. Carter watched Yakov, the Russian, and the boy disappear into the building. If the boy wasn't known now, he'd be known later. Everything that they were getting, they were uploading to intelligence databases throughout the United States. Have we confirmed the Russian? Affirmative. His name is Pavel Borisov, one-time Spetsnaz, turned black market weapons dealer. Apparently, the Duran line is one of the places he does regular business. And nobody's put a leash on this guy? He's a killer, runs with a hard crew. How did the CIA get it onto him? They aren't saying. Carter accepted that. Silence on the CIA's end only meant that they did business with Borisov themselves. The Russians just shows up to the CIA agent, says, "I've got Yakov. Were you looking for him?" That's pretty much it. Although Carter had been in intelligence long enough to know that such things did happen, he'd been in the business long enough to know that sure things could sometimes go awry. But that was why the Reaper program was so important. Even if Jacob somehow got away, the man couldn't escape the UAV recon. The Al leader was hosed now. Jacob just didn't know it. Chapter 9. Did they make you go to school in juvie? Or did they just turn you learn how to cook? Did you just learn how to cook while you were there? Startled, Pike took a moment to figure out his response. He and Hector sat in one of the booths at the diner. The boys' math book lay open in front of them, and Pike was studying one of the homework sheets that was bleeding red. He looked at Hector. They make you go to school in juvie. They make you go to school in juvie. Real school or juvie school? Both, sometimes. Hector's eyes rounded. At the same time? Amigo, that's a lot of school. Surprising himself, Pike laughed. Sometimes that was how it went with Hector. The boy could make him laugh no matter how bad things were. And considering that the Tulsa PD plainclothes guys were still in the diner with them, and that Monty was going to be spending money upgrading his house security, things were pretty bad. Not at the same time, buddy. Sometimes I went to regular school and sometimes I went to juvie school. Which was better? Regular school. Why? Page 68. Because there were girls in regular school. Hector grimaced and stuck out his tongue. Girls are loco. Trust me, there's going to come a time when you don't mind them so much. My sister is muy loco. She makes all the guys around her so mad, but they keep coming back. It is estupido. Estupido. That's what you've said. Pike turned back to the page of homework. What was Juvie like? Pike was conscious of the boy's body warmth next to his. Normally he didn't like anyone invading his personal space, but having Hector around reminded him of how it had been when he and Petey were young. That was only the time he'd ever felt close to anyone. He didn't like the way Hector's being there, talking to him, kept bringing those memories back. Remembering those times was like juggling shards of glass. He'd put that old pain away. Juvie was a pain in the. Pike stopped himself short, remembering who he was with. Juvie was a pain. Why are you asking so many questions about that? Because until you said it the other day, I didn't know where you were from. Oh, tell me some stories. Stories about what? About what it was like there when you were little, like me. My mom sometimes tells me stories about when she was a little girl. She probably has good stories to tell. Pike only remembered all the foster homes, the fights, the harsh authority, and the prophecies of doom and gloom that everyone wanted to promise him because of his attitude. The way he remembered it, his distant attitude, his willingness to be a loner, was the only thing that had gotten him through those times. He'd remained a loner. If he ever made a mistake of depending on someone, no one could disappoint him if he never did, or hurt him. And even lies didn't matter because he didn't believe anything anyone ever told him. No, her stories are all boring except for the one when she had me in the hospital and brought me home. You like that one, do you? Yeah, that's a good one. Very funny. I bet it is. You should come to dinner some night and let my mom tell it to you. Thinking that might ever happen left Pike feeling awkward. He didn't like being around families. Monty had asked him over for dinner and even to Little League games on several occasions. Pike had always claimed prior commitments or a work thing he wanted to finish up. Gradually, Monty had figured out that dinner with the family wasn't going to happen and had let it go. Nobody's feelings had gotten hurt. Your mom and I both work late, Hector. I wouldn't want her to have to fix dinner for me. She comes home tired. She can make my sister fix dinner. I don't think your sister would be too happy about it either. Besides, like I said, I work a lot. You're not working now, only because I'm helping you with your homework. People depend on me to get their cars fixed, like Mrs. Garcia. Pike nodded. Yeah, exactly, like Mrs. Garcia. He slid the homework paper over to the boy. Take a look at this problem and rework it. Without complaint, Hector took the paper and reworked the problem. He wrote down the numbers without hesitation, speeding through the steps without missing one. Page 70. Pike looked over the work. Good job. Why didn't you do this the first time? Hector lifted his thin shoulders and let them drop. I don't know. It's easier doing math when you're here. Uh-huh. Narrowing his eyes, Hector studied him suspiciously. You sure you don't have any stories from when you were a kid? No, not even one. I lived. I got out of there. That's a pretty good story. The juvie people let you out? No, I let myself out. How? Pike looked at the boy and put on a serious face. One night I was very sneaky. Hector laughed. Like a ninja. Just like a ninja. I escaped and never went back. Pike tapped the homework. Come on. We gotta pay attention here. The server who had been taking care of them came back to their table. She brought a fresh soft drink for Hector and a glass of tea for Pike. She smiled as she put the glasses on the table. Hi, Pike. Hi. Pike felt guilty because he didn't know the woman's name. With everything that had been going on the last few days, he was getting irritated at how his everyday life was becoming complicated and starting to chafe. Everybody was a lot more involved with him than he liked them to be. He wanted things to go back to the way they had been when he was a stranger to the neighborhood and the neighborhood treated him like an outsider. Things had been less tense then. The server nodded at the papers. Math? Yeah, I never liked math. Too many numbers. And when they started getting to the imaginary, I just got completely lost. Hector looked up at her and grinned. Math's okay, but I like reading best, especially the imaginary parts. Is that right? The server was about Pike's age, but she was too slim and too pale. She worked a lot of evenings and night shifts. Pike had noticed her over the last few months. She usually stuck to the job, only talking to the other servers and to guests. He recognized the hurt child in her because he'd grown up around that, and he knew to look for. But he didn't know her story. He just knew that there was a story. More than that, he didn't want to know her story. He'd heard it all before. It wasn't special to anybody but her. She'd learn. Yep, when I grow up, I'm going to write stories. Well, look at you, the server gave him a big smile. I can tell people I knew you before you got to be a celebrity. Yep, the waitress ruffled Hector's hair and looked at Pike. Let me know if you need anything else. He nodded. She continued her rounds, getting special attention from the waitress bothered him. He liked coming into the diner, getting something to eat there, or taking something to go in those styrofoam containers. A business transaction, without any strings, nothing social. He didn't want to be visible while he was there. Hector hadn't given up. Did you have a friend when you were in juvie? Pike considered the question, wanting to put an end to all of the curiosity, but not wanting to hurt Hector's feelings. Maybe talking about juvie isn't such a good idea. Why? A lot of people don't like guys who are in juvie. Why? Page 72. Because people think that guys who went to juvie were bad guys. Why? Because most of them are. You're not a bad guy. Hector smiled and shook his head as if that were the weirdest idea he'd ever heard. You fix people's cars and you're in the army. Marines. That correction was out of Pike's mouth before he knew it. He took more pride in being a Marine than he wanted some days. Okay, Marines, but you're not a bad guy. Hector frowned and lowered his voice. But we don't have to talk about juvie anymore. Good. Pike sipped his tea. You didn't answer the question. What question? Did you have a friend when you were a kid? Pike thought about that and didn't want to shut the boys down again. Yeah, I had a friend. What was his name? Petey. That's a weird name. Pike chuckled. Yeah, I guess it was. But that was what everybody called him. Was he cool? Big time cool. Coolest guy I ever knew. Are you still friends? That hurt more than Pike expected it to. Probably because Hector asked with such innocence, and there was so much guilt associated with all of that. But Pike quickly covered it up. Petey died. A shocked and embarrassed look filled Hector's face. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been asking so many questions. No, it's okay. Pike told the boy that. But it really wasn't okay. The argument with the witness protection program attorney was still fresh in his mind, and it had brought back those old memories of Petey lying there bleeding out in Pike's arms. Pike had tried in vain to stop the bleeding, but he didn't have enough hands and there hadn't been anyone else around. In the end, all he'd been able to do was hold Petey until he was gone. Just slipped right through Pike's fingers while he was trying to get him to the hospital and left him alone all over again. No one ever stayed. Do you miss him? Hector spoke only a little above a whisper. I do. Hector hesitated a moment and then plowed on with what was on his mind. Does he talk to you? No. Pike didn't know where the kid got that. Dead people didn't talk. They were dead. Then they were in the ground or burned up, and they were gone forever. That was what being dead meant. I just wonder because my mom says that sometimes people you love talk to you when you need them most. She says her mom has talked to her, even though she was already with the angels. And that's part of the story of when I was born. My grandmother spoke to my mom and told her that I was going to be special. You are special, kiddo. You are too, Pike. Briefly, Hector looked at him as if expecting him to say something else, but Pike didn't know what to say. The whole conversation had made him uncomfortable and angry, and he felt like he had when he'd been trapped in juvie, just waiting till he had something he could fight back against. Let's get to your homework. It's late. Your mom will come home soon and she'll be worried about you. And I got Mrs. Garcia's car to work on some more. Okay, Hector turned his attention to the math. At the front of the diner, the plainclothes detectives evidently decided that watching Pike teach math to a third grader was boring. Or maybe they were just getting off shift. They got up together with a final look at Pike and headed out the door. A few minutes later, for a few minutes, Hector worked quietly. Pike felt the old anger moving around inside of him and tried to get it in hand, but it was whipping around like a broke-back rattler. He gazed at the boy and wondered how he could be so at peace with himself and his life when it was really hard. A missing father, an older sister was about to leave the nest, a mother who worked too much because she had to in order to make ends meet. The kid's balance sheet was stacked against him. Yet here he was, doing his homework, learning from somebody his mother shouldn't even let him hang out around with. Pike didn't know why Hector's mother let the boy come around the garage. He figured maybe she just didn't know what the kid was doing. She couldn't control Hector if she wasn't there. The bell over the diner's door jangled, followed almost immediately by a brief cursing from one of the female servers. Pike glanced at the door and saw four men about his age enter the diner. They wore their hair long, trailing down their necks and brushing their shoulders. All four were clad in jeans, dirty baseball caps, and shirts with the sleeves torn off. Their arms splotched with tattoos and their faces covered with beards and mustaches that had been allowed to grow untended. One of them, a tall, raw-boned man with pale skin that Pike guessed was a prison prowler, looked around the diner and spotted the server who had been taking care of Pike and Hector. The man wore a shirt open to mid-chest. An arrowhead necklace lay against the hollow of his throat. Two tattooed tears were on his cheek under his left eye. The man looked at the server who had drawn up into herself and frozen like a deer in headlights. She stared at the man like she couldn't believe he was standing there. I got out, Teresa, and you weren't there. The man smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. Of course, I wasn't really expecting you to be. You ain't been to see me in over a year, and you said you wasn't coming back. Carl, Teresa's voice was strained, part hoarse, whispered, you ain't supposed to be here. Why, this here's a fine public establishment, open to anybody that's got money in his pocket. I got money. Carl pulled out a wrinkled $20 bill. Teresa shook her head and unshed tears glimmered in her eyes. You don't want to do this, Carl. Truly you don't. You just got out. Tendons strained in Carl's neck, and color flamed up from his chest to his face. No, I just got out. What do you think spent the last 3 years in that hole? Sure wasn't you. You pled out when the cops came snooping around. Let me go down by myself. You didn't mind spending all the money and the meth brought in when I was cooking it, though, did you? Tears leaked from Teresa's eyes, but she still didn't move a muscle. Besides Pike, Hector got tense as a board. Instinctively, Pike dropped a protective arm over the boy's thin shoulders. It's going to be okay, kiddo. Hector didn't say anything. Carl grinned, and the expression looked like it had been carved onto his face. Now I'm back, and I want to be fed. So get over here and take my order. Teresa didn't move. One of the other servers at the pass-through window turned to talk to someone. Call the cops, quick. With one long stride, Carl crossed the space between himself and Teresa. He wrapped a long-fingered black-taloned hand around her elbow and yanked her towards the nearest table. I said, get over here and take my order. No. Teresa fought back against him, but he was too strong. He dragged her to the table, and then she clawed at his arm with her free hand, slicing streams of blood along his forearm and wrist. Carl cursed, released her, and backhanded her with surprising speed. The blow knocked her from her feet, and she went down flat on her back. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, and she cried, wrapping her arms around her head in a learned response as she curled up into a ball. Pike was out of the booth and moving even as Carl drew back to boot to kick the woman. Carl saw him coming and grinned. You shacked up with her, coming over here to protect? Without a word, Pike walked straight up to the man and hit him in the mouth. Talking to Carl would have only been a waste of time and left Pike open to an attack. The man had come into the diner looking for a fight and obviously wasn't going to leave until he had one. The impact from Pike's blow staggered Carl and knocked him backwards. Surprisingly, he remained on his feet, and Pike realized the man was made of sterner stuff than he had first thought. He hadn't pulled his punch. Watching the man, never taking his eyes from him, Pike reached down and helped Teresa to her feet. He pushed her towards the back of the diner and slipped into place between her and Carl. The man stood there, and this time maniacal amusement lit his face. He wiped at the blood running from his nose and his burst lips. Crimson stained his teeth. Well, now, that was a mistake. You pulled a lockback knife from it. He pulled a lockback knife from his belt and flicked it open in a glimmer of steel. Light splintered from the razor-sharp edge. Pike stood loose and easy, resting on the balls of his feet, his hands open at his sides. Got nothing to say? Carl came forward and took a few swipes with the blade, obviously intending to scare Pike with the weapon. Instead, Pike crossed the distance between them and one step, grabbed Carl's wrist with his left hand and held it locked there. Then he punched Carl in the face 3 times in quick succession, finishing up with a jab to the throat that he pulled to keep from killing the man only because he didn't want to do something like that in front of Hector. Personally, Pike figured the man was a waste of breath. Erasing him from the face of the planet wouldn't have been a bad thing. Carl swayed drunkenly, his beer-tainted breath swelling harsh as kerosene. Pike grabbed the man's shirt, stepped it into him again, and kneed him in the crotch. As Carl sagged, Pike controlled him with the captured wrist, twisting the arm till he shoved his opponent face down on the floor. He took the knife away as Carl's 3 buddies started to move forward. Pike glared at them and they froze, holding their hands up in surrender. Then the front door banged open. As it turned out, the 2 plainclothes detectives had evidently been talking in the parking lot and had seen the violence break out. They came in pointing guns and yelling, flashing badges. Tulsa police, down on the floor! One of them pointed his weapon at Pike. Pike didn't argue. He placed the captured knife on the floor and slid it away. Then he lay down and waited for them to handcuff him. As he lay there feeling the steel cuffs bite into his flesh, he almost laughed. It was the first time all day that it felt like his old self. End of chapter 9.